In rugged landscapes where the line between safety and danger is razor thin, moments of calm can collapse in an instant. What begins as fishing trips, family outings, or quiet hikes often turns into chaos when raw instinct meets human vulnerability. From a motorboat torn apart on Russia's Kutu River to a kayak ambush off Kodiak Island, these stories stretch across continents, and terrors few forget. In this video, we'll uncover 6 chilling encounters that reveal the true unpredictability of the wild. The remote wilderness of Ussuri Krai in far eastern Russia had always been known for its unforgiving nature and dangerous wildlife. This vast region bordering China and North Korea is home to some of the world's largest brown bears, with males often weighing over 600 kilograms. The area's dense forests and winding rivers had witnessed countless encounters between humans and bears over the decades, but few as tragic as the one that would unfold on September 7, 2025. Viktor Sokolov, a 42-year-old construction foreman from Vladivostok, had planned the fishing expedition as a late summer getaway with his longtime friend, Irina Makarova, 38, who worked as a school teacher in the same city. They had decided to bring along Irina's younger siblings, Daniil, 16, and Alina, 14, who were visiting for their school holidays. The group had rented a modest 18-foot motorboat from a local outfitter, planning to spend the day fishing for salmon and pike along one of the region's pristine waterways. The morning had started promisingly enough. Victor had successfully navigated the boat approximately 15 kilometers upstream from their launch point, finding a secluded stretch of river that locals claimed held some of the best fishing in the territory. The water ran deep and clear, flanked by towering conifers and dense undergrowth that created an almost cathedral-like atmosphere. Irina had remarked earlier that morning how peaceful everything seemed, a stark contrast to their busy urban lives. What the fishing party did not know was that the summer of 2025 had been particularly harsh for the local bear population. An unseasonably cold spring, followed by drought conditions, had severely reduced the berry crops that normally sustained the massive Russian grizzlies through their pre-hibernation feeding period. Wildlife biologists would later confirm that many bears in the region were showing signs of severe malnutrition, making them increasingly desperate and aggressive in their search for food. By mid-afternoon, their fishing had been moderately successful. Victor had caught 2 decent-sized pike, while Daniil had managed to land his first salmon of the trip, much to his obvious delight. The fish were being kept in a large cooler filled with river water, and the scent of their catch was beginning to permeate the immediate area around the boat. Approximately 400 meters downstream, Yuri Petrov, a 51-year-old local guide who had been fishing these waters for over 3 decades, had anchored his smaller boat near a fallen log that often attracted fish. Petrov later told investigators that he had noticed unusual sounds coming from the forest throughout the day, including what he described as the distinctive huffing and branch breaking that typically indicated a large bear moving through dense vegetation. At approximately 3:47 p.m., according to Petrov's later testimony, he observed a massive brown bear emerge from the tree line roughly 200 meters upstream from where Victor's group had been fishing. The animal, which wildlife officials later estimated to weigh between 550 and 600 kilograms, appeared emaciated despite its enormous size. Its ribs were clearly visible, and its normally thick coat appeared patchy and dull. The bear had apparently been tracking the scent of the caught fish for some time. Without hesitation, the desperate animal plunged into the river and began swimming directly toward the motorboat with powerful, determined strokes. Bears are surprisingly capable swimmers, and this particular animal moved through the water with alarming speed and purpose. Victor was the first to notice the approaching danger. He immediately began shouting warnings to his companions while frantically attempting to start the boat's outboard motor. Irina quickly pulled both teenagers toward the center of the ship, telling them to stay low and remain calm. The witness would later describe Daniil as appearing more curious than frightened, while his younger sister Alina seemed to grasp the severity of their situation immediately. The motor, which had been running smoothly all day, chose that critical moment to fail. Victor pulled the starting cord repeatedly, producing only grinding sounds and occasional sputtering. The bear was now less than 50 meters away and closing fast, its massive head visible above the water as it powered toward them with single-minded determination. Yuri Petrov, witnessing the unfolding disaster, immediately fired a marine flare gun into the air and began shouting at the top of his lungs, hoping to distract or frighten the approaching bear. His efforts proved futile. The starving animal had apparently committed entirely to reaching the source of the fish scent and showed no signs of being deterred. The first impact came when the bear reached the boat's starboard side. Using its massive forepaws, it struck the fiberglass hull with such force that the entire vessel lurched violently to port. Victor lost his footing and fell backward, while Irina struggled to maintain her grip on both teenagers. The bear then began using its claws to gain purchase on the boat's side, its weight causing the vessel to list dangerously to one side. Victor managed to regain his footing and grabbed an aluminum boat hook, attempting to push the animal away. The bear responded by lunging forward and striking Victor with its right paw, the blow connecting with his chest and shoulders with devastating force. The impact sent Victor over the side and into the water, where the bear immediately turned its attention to him. 16-year-old Danielle, displaying either remarkable courage or teenage foolishness, attempted to help Victor by throwing their tackle box at the bear's head. This action only served to attract the animal's attention to the boy. With Victor struggling in the water nearby, the bear hauled itself partially into the boat and struck Danielle with its left paw, knocking him unconscious and sending him over the opposite side. Irina and Alina found themselves trapped in the boat's small cabin area, as the massive bear, now partially inside the vessel, began methodically destroying everything within reach. The animal seemed driven by an almost frantic hunger, tearing apart the cooler containing their catch and consuming the fish with desperate efficiency. Yuri Petrov later testified that he could hear Irina shouting for help and Alina screaming, but the bear's massive bulk blocked most of his view of what was happening inside the boat. He attempted to approach in his own vessel, but was forced to maintain a safe distance as the enraged animal continued its attack. The bear's rampage inside the confined space of the boat cabin lasted approximately 8 minutes. When Petrov was finally able to approach the scene, he found all 4 members of the fishing party had succumbed to their injuries. Victor and Danielle were found in the water nearby, while Irina and Alina were discovered inside the destroyed cabin. The bear had disappeared back into the forest by the time emergency responders arrived nearly 2 hours later. Petrov had used his satellite phone to contact authorities immediately after confirming there were no survivors, but the remote location made rapid response impossible. Regional wildlife officials later confirmed that the attack was consistent with the behavior of a severely malnourished bear driven to desperation by food scarcity. They issued immediate warnings to all recreational users of the waterways in Ussuri Krai, emphasizing that even activities typically considered safe, such as motorboat fishing, could become dangerous when bears were forced into unusual hunting behaviors by environmental pressures. The incident marked the first recorded case in the region of a brown bear attacking people in a motorboat, highlighting the unpredictable nature of wildlife encounters when natural food sources become scarce. The remote wilderness of northern Greenland had remained largely unchanged for millennia, its vast ice sheets and frozen landscapes serving as home to some of the world's most formidable predators. In March 2025, this pristine Arctic environment would become the setting for a terrifying encounter that would forever change one photographer's perspective on wildlife documentation. Hanna Keltsen, a 36-year-old wildlife photographer from Copenhagen, had spent months planning her expedition to capture images of polar bears in their natural hunting grounds. The Danish government had issued special permits for her small research team to access areas typically restricted to scientists and indigenous hunters. Hanna had built her reputation photographing dangerous wildlife across 4 continents, but the Arctic represented her most ambitious project yet. The expedition team consisted of Hanna, her Inuit guide Nuka Peterson, and 2 graduate students from a university in Copenhagen's Arctic Studies program. They had established a temporary camp approximately 80 kilometers northeast of Qaanaaq, one of the world's northernmost settlements. The location provided optimal access to seal hunting grounds, where polar bears were known to concentrate during the spring months. March in northern Greenland brought extended daylight, but temperatures that rarely climbed above -30 degrees Celsius. The landscape consisted of seemingly endless white expanses, broken only by pressure ridges where massive ice sheets had collided and thrust skyward. These formations created both photographic opportunities and potential hiding places for the region's apex predators. On the morning of March 15th, Hanna had separated from her team to photograph a series of ice formations approximately 400 meters from their base camp. Her guide had repeatedly warned her about maintaining visual contact with the group, emphasizing that polar bears could approach with remarkable stealth across the seemingly flat terrain. Hanna had acknowledged these warnings but felt confident in her ability to spot danger across the open ice. The photographer had been adjusting her camera settings near a particularly striking ice ridge when she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. Approximately 150 meters away, a massive male polar bear was moving directly toward her position, its deliberate gait characteristic of a hunting predator. The animal appeared to be in excellent condition, its thick white coat pristine against the Arctic landscape. Hannah immediately recalled her guide's instructions about encountering polar bears. She forced herself to remain motionless while slowly backing away from the ice ridge, avoiding any sudden movements that might trigger an aggressive response. The bear continued its approach, occasionally stopping to test the air with its sensitive nose, apparently trying to determine whether this unusual figure represented a threat or potential prey. The distance between them was less than 50 meters when the bear suddenly accelerated its approach. Hannah pressed herself against a small ice mound, keeping her gaze directed downward while fighting every instinct that urged her to run. The polar bear lunged at a snowdrift mere inches from her boots, its massive jaws snapping audibly in the frigid air. From the base camp, Nuka Peterson had been monitoring Hannah's position through binoculars. Upon seeing the bear's aggressive behavior, he immediately fired a flare gun and began shouting as he approached on his snowmobile. The sudden noise and bright light caused the bear to retreat several meters, though it continued to circle Hannah's position with obvious interest. The guide's intervention provided Hannah with the opportunity to retreat slowly toward the approaching snowmobile. The polar bear, apparently deciding that this situation involved too much commotion for a successful hunt, eventually wandered away across the ice in search of easier prey. Hannah later described the encounter as lasting approximately 12 minutes, though she admitted that her sense of time had been severely distorted by fear and adrenaline. The remainder of the expedition proceeded without incident, though Hannah found herself unable to venture far from the group without experiencing anxiety attacks. She completed her photographic project, but later acknowledged that the encounter had fundamentally changed her approach to wildlife photography. The experience served as a stark reminder that, unlike many other large predators, polar bears view humans as potential prey rather than threats to be avoided. Wildlife experts later reviewed Hannah's account and confirmed that her response had likely prevented a fatal attack. Polar bears possess extraordinary patience and persistence when stalking prey, and running would almost certainly have triggered a pursuit that Hannah could not have survived. The incident highlighted the unique dangers of Arctic wildlife photography and the critical importance of experienced local guides in such environments. The rugged mountains of central Colorado had long been recognized as prime black bear habitat, with dense forests and abundant natural food sources supporting one of North America's healthiest bear populations. However, September 2021 would prove to be a month when the delicate balance between human recreation and wildlife behavior would be violently disrupted in ways that few visitors to the region could have anticipated. Mara Jensen, a 31-year-old software engineer from Denver, had organized a weekend retreat with 5 college friends at a remote cabin nestled approximately 25 kilometers southwest of a small mountain town. The rustic structure, built in the 1970s, sat on private land surrounded by national forest and had been rented through a vacation property website. The group had planned a combination of hiking, fishing, and general relaxation away from their urban routines. The cabin itself was typical of older mountain construction, featuring log walls, a stone fireplace, and large windows designed to showcase the surrounding wilderness. What the property listing had not mentioned was that the structure's remote location and previous guests' careless food storage practices had attracted the attention of local wildlife throughout the summer months. Mara's group consisted of Tom Harris, a 29-year-old accountant, Sarah Mitchell, a 30-year-old nurse, David Chen, a 32-year-old teacher, and Jennifer Walsh, a 28-year-old marketing specialist. They had arrived on Friday evening, September 10th, and spent Saturday hiking local trails and preparing elaborate meals in the cabin's well-equipped kitchen. Unknown to the group, a large male black bear weighing approximately 180 kilograms had been systematically raiding campsites and rental properties in the area throughout the late summer. Colorado wildlife officials had received multiple reports of an unusually bold bear that showed no fear of humans and had learned to associate cabins and campsites with easy food sources. On Saturday night, the group had prepared a barbecue dinner on the cabin's deck, leaving cooking utensils and food scraps outside longer than recommended by local wildlife guidelines. The scent of grilled meat and leftover food attracted the attention of the problematic bear, which had been foraging in the area for several days. At approximately 2:30 a.m. on Sunday, the sleeping occupants were awakened by loud crashes and splintering wood coming from the cabin's side entrance. Mara initially assumed that high winds had blown over outdoor furniture, but the rhythmic nature of the impact suggested something more deliberate and concerning. Tom Harris was the first to investigate, approaching the side door with a flashlight while the others gathered in the main living area. Through the door's window, he could see a massive black shape methodically destroying the wooden steps and attempting to gain entry to the cabin. The bear had apparently detected food odors from inside and was determined to investigate further. The group quickly realized that their situation was potentially dangerous. Mara attempted to secure the main room by pushing furniture against the entrances, while the others gathered flashlights and anything that might serve as a weapon or deterrent. The cabin's construction, while charming, was not designed to withstand a determined bear attack. The black bear eventually succeeded in destroying the side door's frame, allowing it to push into the cabin's mudroom area. The animal immediately began investigating food storage areas, tearing apart cabinets and scattering supplies with methodical efficiency. The sound of splintering wood and crashing metal filled the small structure. When the bear attempted to break through the interior door leading to the main cabin, Tom Harris positioned himself to defend the others. As the door gave way, the bear pushed through and immediately struck Tom with its right paw, knocking him backward and inflicting deep claw wounds to his shoulder and chest. The impact sent him crashing into a wooden coffee table, resulting in additional injuries. Mara and the others immediately began shouting and shining flashlights directly at the bear while throwing whatever objects they could reach. The combination of bright lights, loud noises, and multiple moving figures apparently confused and intimidated the animal, which retreated to the mudroom area to continue investigating food sources. For approximately 45 minutes, the standoff continued, with the bear methodically destroying food storage areas, while the humans maintained their defensive position in the main room. The animal showed particular interest in a large cooler containing their weekend food supplies, eventually dragging it outside through the destroyed door. Once the bear had secured the cooler and its contents, it appeared to lose interest in the cabin itself. The group waited another hour before cautiously investigating the damage and determining that the animal had departed the immediate area. Tom Harris's injuries, while serious, were not life-threatening, and the group was able to provide basic first aid until emergency responders arrived. Colorado wildlife officials later confirmed that the attacking bear matched descriptions of an animal that had been causing problems throughout the region. The bear was eventually located and relocated to a more remote area, though officials acknowledged that animals displaying such bold behavior rarely modify their patterns permanently. The incident served as a stark reminder that even modern cabin construction offered little protection against determined wildlife, and that proper food storage in bear country was not merely a suggestion, but a critical safety requirement that could mean the difference between a peaceful weekend and a life-threatening encounter. The wilderness areas of northwestern Montana had gained international recognition for their pristine grizzly bear habitat, supporting some of North America's largest and most dangerous predators. September 2022 would serve as a tragic reminder of how quickly recreational activities can turn deadly when human judgment fails in the presence of these formidable animals. Olivia Reed, a 34-year-old marketing coordinator from Seattle, had planned a hiking expedition with 3 friends to explore a renowned mountain trail system approximately 40 kilometers east of a small Montana town. The group had specifically selected this area for its reputation as a prime wildlife viewing territory, hoping to observe bears, elk, and other large mammals from a safe distance. The hiking party consisted of Marcus Thompson, a 36-year-old photographer, Jessica Rodriguez, a 32-year-old teacher, and Brian Wilson, a 35-year-old engineer. All 4 participants considered themselves experienced outdoor enthusiasts, though none possessed extensive knowledge of bear behavior or safety protocols in grizzly country. The trail they had chosen wound through dense coniferous forest, interspersed with natural meadows that typically provided excellent wildlife viewing opportunities during the early autumn months. Local ranger stations had reported an increase in bear activity throughout the area as animals prepared for hibernation by consuming massive quantities of seasonal foods. On the morning of September 18th, the group had hiked approximately 8 kilometers into the wilderness when they encountered a massive grizzly bear feeding in a natural clearing roughly 80 meters from the established trail. The animal, later estimated by wildlife officials to weigh between 450 and 500 kilograms, appeared completely focused on consuming berries from several productive bushes. Marcus Thompson immediately recognized the significance of the sighting. He began photographing the bear from their position on the trail, using a telephoto lens to capture images while maintaining what he considered a safe distance. The other group members watched the magnificent animal with obvious excitement, though Jessica Rodriguez expressed concerns about lingering in the area. Olivia Reed, however, became fixated on the idea of capturing a dramatic selfie with the grizzly bear visible in the background. Despite repeated warnings from her companions about maintaining distance from the animal, she began slowly moving toward the clearing while holding her smartphone in preparation for photographs. The experienced members of the group immediately recognized the danger in Olivia's actions and began calling for her to return to the trail. Marcus Thompson later told investigators that he had specifically warned about the unpredictable nature of grizzly bears and the importance of giving them wide berths, particularly during feeding activities. Olivia had approached to within approximately 25 meters of the feeding bear when she crouched down and began attempting to frame her photograph. The grizzly, which had been aware of the human presence but initially showed no aggressive behavior, suddenly raised its head and focused directly on the approaching figure. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. The grizzly bear immediately abandoned its feeding and charged directly toward Olivia's position, covering the distance between them in mere seconds. Bears, despite their massive size, are capable of reaching speeds exceeding 50 kilometers per hour, particularly over short distances. Olivia attempted to retreat when she realized the bear's aggressive intent, but her position in the clearing offered no immediate shelter or obstacles that might impede the animal's approach. She stumbled backward while screaming, but the grizzly reached her before she could regain her footing or create any meaningful distance. The initial impact knocked Olivia to the ground with devastating force. The bear struck her with its right forepaw, inflicting massive trauma to her torso and head. Her friends immediately began shouting and throwing their backpacks and hiking equipment toward the bear, desperately attempting to distract or deter the animal from continuing its attack. Marcus Thompson and Brian Wilson grabbed large branches and rocks while advancing toward the scene, making as much noise as possible in hopes of driving off the grizzly. Jessica Rodriguez used her whistle and continued shouting while calling for emergency assistance on her satellite communication device. The bear struck Olivia a second time before the combined efforts of her friends succeeded in causing the animal to retreat several meters. However, the damage had already been inflicted. Olivia had sustained injuries that would prove fatal despite the group's immediate first aid efforts and the eventual arrival of emergency medical personnel. The grizzly bear remained in the vicinity for approximately 20 minutes after the attack, occasionally approaching the group before retreating again. Eventually, the animal departed the clearing and disappeared into the dense forest, apparently satisfied that the threat had been neutralized. Emergency responders reached the scene approximately 90 minutes after the initial attack, but Olivia Reed was pronounced dead upon their arrival. An investigation by Montana wildlife officials concluded that the bear had acted in accordance with normal defensive behavior when approached too closely by a human. The incident prompted renewed emphasis on bear safety education programs throughout the region. Wildlife experts emphasized that grizzly bears, although generally avoiding human contact, would respond aggressively to perceived threats, particularly during feeding activities or when startled at close range. Officials noted that even experienced hiking groups could not guarantee individual safety when one member made decisions that put the entire party at risk. The tragedy served as a sobering reminder that wildlife photography and recreation required constant vigilance and strict adherence to establish safety protocols in areas inhabited by large predators. The mountainous regions of central Slovakia had experienced a significant expansion of their brown bear population throughout the early 2020s, with improved conservation efforts leading to increased encounters between humans and these powerful predators. July 2024 would demonstrate how quickly a peaceful camping experience could transform into a terrifying confrontation when wildlife management and human behavior intersect in dangerous ways. The mountain campground where the incident occurred sat at an elevation of approximately 900 meters, surrounded by dense coniferous forests that provided an ideal habitat for European brown bears. The facility had operated for over 3 decades, primarily serving families and outdoor enthusiasts seeking access to hiking trails and scenic mountain landscapes. Katerina Novak, a 28-year-old graphic designer from Bratislava, had organized a camping weekend with 4 friends, planning to spend 3 days exploring the region's natural attractions while staying in the campground's RV rental units. Her companions included Pavel Horak, a 30-year-old engineer, Andrea Svoboda, a 26-year-old teacher, Martin Krejci, a 32-year-old photographer, and Zuzana Pokorny, a 29-year-old nurse. The group had arrived on Friday evening, July 12th, and spent Saturday participating in typical camping activities, including hiking, cooking outdoors, and socializing with other campers. The campground's relaxed atmosphere and beautiful mountain setting had created exactly the peaceful retreat they had been seeking. What the campers did not realize was that the unusually warm summer of 2024 had significantly altered local wildlife behavior patterns. European brown bears, typically more active during cooler periods, had extended their foraging activities well into the evening hours. Additionally, a series of dry conditions had reduced natural food sources, forcing bears to explore alternative options, including human food supplies. The campground itself had experienced minor bear encounters throughout the summer, but management had not implemented comprehensive wildlife deterrent measures or adequately educated guests about proper food storage procedures. Many campers, including Katarina's group, had been leaving coolers and food supplies outside their RVs overnight. At approximately 11:30 p.m. on Saturday, a large male brown bear weighing an estimated 350 kilograms emerged from the forest and began investigating the campground's perimeter. The animal appeared to be following scent trails from improperly stored food and garbage that had accumulated throughout the busy weekend. The bear initially focused on overturned garbage containers and abandoned picnic supplies, methodically searching for any edible items that might be available. However, the concentrated food odors from multiple RVs and campsites soon attracted its attention to the main camping area, where dozens of families were sleeping. Katarina and her friends were awakened by the sound of metal crashing and what Pavel later described as heavy breathing directly outside their RV. Through the vehicle's windows, they could see a massive dark shape moving between nearby campsites, occasionally stopping to investigate tents and outdoor equipment. The bear approached their RV and began sniffing around the entrance, apparently detecting food odors from their evening meal preparation. When it encountered resistance from the locked door, the animal started striking the vehicle's exterior walls with its forepaws, producing deep scratches in the aluminum siding and causing the entire structure to shake violently. Other campers throughout the facility were simultaneously experiencing similar encounters as the bear moved systematically through the area. The animal knocked over bicycles, collapsed several tents, and destroyed camping furniture while searching for food sources. Its powerful claws left deep gouges in RV exteriors and completely demolished several outdoor storage areas. Katarina and her friends recognized that remaining inside their RV provided limited protection against a determined bear attack. They began implementing noise-making strategies they had read about in camping guides, banging metal pots and pans while shouting through the windows in attempts to intimidate or confuse the animal. Their noise-making efforts were joined by other campers throughout the facility, creating a cacophony that apparently succeeded in overwhelming the bear's senses. The animal began moving more erratically between campsites, occasionally retreating toward the forest edge before returning to investigate new areas. The confrontation continued for approximately 45 minutes, during which the bear caused extensive property damage but showed no signs of aggressive behavior toward the humans themselves. The animal appeared more interested in accessing food supplies than in confronting the campers directly, though its massive size and strength made even non-aggressive behavior extremely dangerous. Eventually, the combined noise from multiple camping groups and the lack of easily accessible food sources convinced the bear to abandon its investigation of the campground. The animal retreated into the forest shortly after midnight, leaving behind a scene of considerable destruction but no human injuries. Damage assessment the following morning revealed that the bear had affected more than 20 individual campsites, with several RVs requiring major repairs and numerous tents destroyed. The incident prompted immediate changes to the campground's wildlife management policies, including mandatory food storage requirements and improved education programs for guests. Slovakian wildlife officials later confirmed that the attacking bear exhibited behavior consistent with animals experiencing food stress due to environmental conditions. They emphasized that proper food storage and waste management were critical factors in preventing similar encounters, particularly as bear populations continued to recover throughout Central Europe. The incident served as a wake-up call for the camping industry regarding the need for comprehensive wildlife management strategies in areas with recovering predator populations, highlighting how quickly recreational activities could become dangerous when proper precautions were not maintained. Kodiak Island, situated in the Gulf of Alaska, has earned international recognition as the home of the world's largest brown bears, with adult males frequently weighing over 680 kilograms during peak feeding seasons. July 2025 would prove that even experienced outdoors people could find themselves in life-threatening situations when encountering these magnificent but dangerous predators in their natural habitat. The remote inlet where the attack occurred lay approximately 45 kilometers from the island's main settlement, accessible only by boat or seaplane. This pristine waterway had gained popularity among adventure tourists and wildlife photographers seeking to observe salmon runs and the massive bears that depended on them for pre-hibernation nutrition. Mark Sullivan, a 42-year-old outdoor equipment sales representative from Anchorage, had planned the kayaking expedition with his longtime friend Ethan Pierce, a 39-year-old fishing guide from the same city. Both men possessed extensive experience in Alaska's wilderness areas and had specifically chosen Kodiak Island for its reputation as a premier bear viewing territory. The pair had arrived on the island 3 days earlier, spending time acclimating to local conditions and consulting with experienced guides about the safest approaches to wildlife observation. They had rented high-quality sea kayaks and camping equipment from a local outfitter who had emphasized the importance of maintaining distance from bears and properly storing all food supplies. July on Kodiak Island brought nearly continuous daylight and peak salmon migration activity, creating optimal conditions for bear viewing, but also increasing the likelihood of encounters between humans and these powerful predators. Local wildlife managers had reported unusually high bear activity throughout the region during the summer of 2025. On the morning of July 15th, Mark and Ethan launched their kayaks into the inlet during what they believed to be an ideal time for salmon photography. The water ran clear and relatively shallow near the shoreline, with numerous rocky outcrops and fallen logs that typically attracted feeding fish and the bears that hunted them. What the kayakers did not realize was that a massive male Kodiak bear had been fishing the same inlet for several days, establishing a territory that it would defend aggressively against perceived intruders. The animal, later estimated by wildlife officials to weigh approximately 650 kilograms, had been particularly successful in catching salmon and had grown increasingly protective of its feeding area. The men had paddled approximately 2 kilometers into the inlet when they began observing salmon jumping and thrashing in the shallow water near a rocky shoreline. Mark started to prepare his camera equipment, while Ethan maneuvered both kayaks into position for optimal photography angles, maintaining what they considered a safe distance from the shore. The massive Kodiak bear emerged from dense shoreline vegetation with startling suddenness, apparently having been resting in the shade after a successful morning of fishing. The animal immediately focused on the kayakers, likely perceiving them as threats to its established feeding territory and accumulated food cache. Without any warning behavior or preliminary posturing, the bear charged directly into the shallow water, heading straight toward the kayaks. Kodiak bears, despite their enormous size, are surprisingly capable swimmers and can move through water with remarkable speed when motivated by territorial instincts or hunger. Mark immediately attempted to paddle backward while shouting warnings to Ethan, but the bear's charge covered the distance between shore and kayaks in mere seconds. The animal struck Mark's kayak with its right forepaw, applying enough force to completely overturn the lightweight vessel and throw both men into the frigid water. The impact sent Mark's camera equipment and supplies scattering across the water's surface. At the same time, both men found themselves struggling to maintain their positions in water that was barely above freezing temperature. The bear continued its aggressive approach, circling the overturned kayaks while emitting huffing sounds and occasionally lunging toward the swimmers. Ethan managed to maintain his grip on his overturned kayak while attempting to position the vessel between himself and the approaching bear. Mark, having been thrown further from his kayak during the initial impact, found himself swimming desperately toward a small rocky outcrop that offered the only visible shelter in the immediate area. The bear's behavior suggested territorial rather than predatory motivation, as it continued to circle and threaten rather than pressing a sustained attack. However, its massive size and obvious agitation made any contact potentially fatal for the humans involved in the encounter. Both men later reported that the water temperature created an additional life-threatening factor, as their ability to swim and think clearly deteriorated rapidly due to cold exposure. Mark reached the rocky outcrop after what felt like several minutes of desperate swimming, while Ethan continued to use his kayak as a barrier against the bear's approaches. The confrontation continued for approximately 20 minutes, with the bear maintaining its aggressive posturing while the men struggled to avoid hypothermia in the frigid water. Eventually, the arrival of a salmon school in deeper water succeeded in diverting the bear's attention away from the kayakers and toward more familiar prey. The massive Kodiak gradually moved away from the overturned kayaks and began fishing in deeper water, allowing Mark and Ethan to begin their careful retreat toward shore. Both men suffered from significant cold exposure and multiple scrapes from their struggles in the rocky water, but avoided serious injuries during the actual encounter. The retreat to shore proved almost as challenging as the initial encounter itself. Mark had managed to pull himself onto the rocky outcrop, but the jagged surfaces had torn his wetsuit and inflicted numerous cuts on his hands and legs. From his precarious position, he could see Ethan still clinging to his overturned kayak approximately 50 meters away, struggling against both the cold water and the current that threatened to carry him further from shore. The bear, now focused on the salmon run, had moved to deeper water but remained visible and potentially dangerous. Mark realized that any attempt to help Ethan would require entering the water again, risking another encounter with the massive predator. However, Ethan's deteriorating condition from cold exposure made immediate action necessary. Using hand signals, Mark communicated his intention to swim toward Ethan's position, while the bear remained distracted by fishing. The distance seemed manageable, but the frigid water temperature meant that both men had limited time before hypothermia became a more immediate threat than the Kodiak bear itself. Mark slipped back into the water and began swimming toward Ethan's kayak, moving as quietly as possible to avoid attracting the bear's attention. The salmon activity had intensified, with fish jumping and splashing throughout the inlet, creating enough disturbance to mask the sounds of his approach. When Mark reached Ethan's position, he found his friend barely conscious and struggling to maintain his grip on the kayak. Ethan's lips had turned blue, and his speech was becoming slurred, indicating advanced stages of cold water exposure that could quickly become life-threatening. Working together, the two men managed to right Ethan's kayak and get him partially back inside, though the cold had severely compromised his coordination. Mark held onto the kayak's stern while kicking to propel them toward the nearest shoreline, constantly monitoring the bear's location to ensure they weren't moving closer to the dangerous animal. The bear had succeeded in catching several large salmon and appeared completely absorbed in feeding, occasionally looking up from the water but showing no interest in the slowly retreating kayakers. The abundance of fish had apparently satisfied both its hunger and territorial instincts, allowing the men to make their escape. Reaching the shoreline took nearly 30 minutes of careful navigation, with Mark doing most of the work while Ethan focused on remaining conscious and retaining body heat. Once on shore, they immediately began emergency warming procedures, sharing dry clothing and building a signal fire to attract potential rescue aircraft. The men had activated their emergency beacon during the initial attack, and a Coast Guard helicopter located them approximately 4 hours after the encounter began. Both were airlifted to medical facilities on the mainland, where they were treated for hypothermia, exhaustion, and multiple lacerations from their struggles in the rocky water. Recovery took several weeks, during which both men had time to reflect on how quickly their planned photography expedition had become a life-threatening survival situation. Mark later admitted that their preparation had focused primarily on wildlife photography techniques rather than emergency response procedures for close encounters with bears. Local wildlife officials later confirmed that the bear's behavior was consistent with territorial defense during peak feeding season, emphasizing that even experienced outdoors people could find themselves in dangerous situations when entering areas actively used by large predators. They noted that the men's survival had depended largely on the availability of salmon, which had diverted the bear's attention at a critical moment. The incident prompted discussions about enhanced safety protocols for recreational activities in prime bear habitat, including the requirement for emergency communication equipment and comprehensive briefings on wildlife behavior patterns. Officials stressed that Kodiak Island's unique ecosystem, which offers unparalleled wildlife viewing opportunities, demands exceptional caution and preparation from all visitors. The attack became part of local safety education programs, demonstrating how territorial behavior during feeding seasons could create unexpected dangers, even for experienced outdoors people. The incident highlighted the importance of understanding local wildlife behavior patterns and maintaining constant vigilance during recreational activities in areas inhabited by the world's largest land predators.